I speak publicly a lot. This is a fee for selling books. No, I'm not Papa Hemingway. I write for the professional market, and this is not done for personal pleasure. This type of writing is more like the death march in Baton without any of the fun. I have to actively promote my name. So, a long time ago, I formed a symbiotic relationship with major publishing houses. People need to be aware, and there are many people writing books. So my publishers fly me to conferences in some small town in Nebraska, and I do my thing. It's similar to how one advances one's career in the body trade by becoming a dancer. You show your audience enough to keep them interested, but if they want to fully disclose the product, they need to pay for it. And it's free advertising for both of us. When I was a child, I was terribly shy. The thought of talking to strangers filled me with dread. The concept of performing in front of hundreds of complete strangers would be as unimaginable as anti-gravity boots. But I became an academician, and over time he overcame this, standing in front of students for years. This is a special situation. They must listen. I'm holding a whip in my hands. The band tonight is a different matter. Each of them was an experienced senior manager. You have to be on top of your game with these guys. Otherwise, they will find ways to express their displeasure in creative and destructive ways. I know my stuff. You don't publish 6 professional books without knowing your business. But when you're on stage, you're entertaining, not informing. I learned this the hard way when I first went on stage. I had 2 hours of serious discussion. Reviews were less than favorable. The best thing they said was that I was boring. It was painful. So, like the burlesque queen in the musical Gypsy, I invented a trick for myself. My attitude the next time was, "Fuck you, audience," and I unloaded on them a bunch of demagogic nonsense that would make Chicken Little look like a naive optimist. They liked it. I was taught by the Jesuits, and this first experience helped me understand the fate of anyone who tries to convince people with logic. The audience wants adrenaline, not the message. And rational discourse can't compete with a guy in a mirror suit telling them they're going to hell. So I performed my usual fire and brimstone speech for the assembled crowd. It was full of allusions to a digital Pearl Harbor and post-apocalyptic societies. I thought it was too simplistic, even though most of what I told them would probably happen. And of course, they absorbed it. Obviously, you can fool all the people for a while. There are 2 types of players in the game of public speaking. One of them is an attention addict. They are on stage during a performance, and they are even more turned on after it. They stay at the event and hug and smile with all their adoring fans. They can't get enough of public admiration. Others are like me. I'm not the guy on stage. Never been. This is an act. As soon as I finish my speech, I shed this mask like a snake sheds its skin. That guy on stage exudes cheerful confidence and general belonging. He's Davy Tyler, the good guy, the guy you want to have a beer with. He communicates with people from the first row to the 50th. Everyone knows that he is their friend. Private Davy Tyler is not a fan of the human race as a whole. So as soon as the applause dies down, this guy asserts his rights again and heads to the nearest bar. As usual, Bernie was waiting for me with a fresh beer. Bernie is my development editor. He's the guy who really paid in English class. Most subject matter experts, especially in technical fields, cannot spell the word grammar correctly, let alone apply it. I'm a botanist, not a writer. That's why major publishers connect me with a development editor. This is a normal situation in the book business. The development editor's responsibility is to turn whatever I give him into a product that is not too embarrassing for the public. You interact with the editor virtually. The editor of my first 2 books was a woman. I've never met her. For all I knew, she could be a 300-pound monster or hotter than Scarlett Johansson. In fact, it might have been a guy pretending to be a woman. All I knew was that she could catch mistakes that no one should have noticed, and she turned my boring bullshit into truly influential content. Bernie took on my 3rd block. He had the same amazing skill and also a sense of humor. Creating a professional 500-page time is roughly the equivalent of a woman giving birth to a rhinoceros. This is exceptional agony over a long period, and you need a sense of humor if you don't want to go crazy. Bernie eased the pains of birth with the driest of Jewish wit, and since then, his services have been included in every contract I sign. I finally met him at a book party. He knew who I was because I was one of the speakers, but I didn't know who he was. All I saw was a brown bear in a rumpled suit and sweat stains approaching me. This guy was massive, and Bernie was as enthusiastic as he was great. He came up to me with a huge smile on his face. I gave him a man hug with a pat on the back, looking around at the other people, trying to figure out who the hell he was. Now he appears at most of my events, especially those that take place in good cities like San Francisco. This time we were at the Fairmont Hotel. The bar area off the lobby is one of those big open spaces where you feel out of place unless you're sipping a martini. Bernie drinks beer straight from the bottle, so he stood out. He also stood out because he weighed about 350 pounds and wore colorful Hawaiian shirts that didn't quite hide his hairy chest. But mostly he stood out because he didn't care at all what other people thought, which basically reflects my own attitude. He was sitting with two guys. These guys wore suits that cost more than my car. A woman was sitting with them. She was absolutely stunning in a Xena warrior princess style. She was more beautiful than attractive. Her facial features were absolutely perfect, but the effect was aesthetic, not sensual. She was Athena, not Aphrodite. She was tall for a woman with a body that could only be described as aggressive, muscular, and lithe. But there was considerable strength to it, as if it could kick your ass without breaking a sweat. She was also almost masculine in her general attitude. She looked strong and in control, not feminine at all, and she radiated male sexuality, powerful and all-encompassing. You had the impression that she would gladly kill you in bed and then feed your body to her cubs. But her main attributes were two of the largest breasts ever installed on a representative of the human race. Although she was quite an imposing woman, these things were disproportionately large. They must have weighed 15 pounds each. I didn't need to explain what Bernie was up to. Bernie cares about me like a brother. He assembled a group of influential people, and he expected me to come and impress them with my manners. We play this little trick at all my shows, and this often leads to consulting and other types of fees that enrich both of us. It had been a long day, including flying across the country, and I thought to myself, damn, Bernie, I don't need this. But a dollar is still a dollar, and Bernie is my best friend. Therefore, once again into battle. I put on the guise of the benevolent Davy Tyler and walked up to the table with my legendary crooked smile. I said, "Hey, partner Bernie." I extended my hand to the first guy. I said, "Davy." He said, "Brad." Same with the next guy, "Davy, Doug." I turned to the woman and offered my hand, "Davy." She shook my hand like a guy would. This was definitely not polite, and then she started squeezing it. She was a very strong woman. She said, "Marigold, but everyone calls me Mary. My parents imposed their strange sense of humor on us." They all examined me. Up close, I didn't look as impressive as I did on stage. Lighting and height changed perspective. Their disappointment in my lack of impressive appearance was obvious. I examined them. Mary was stunning in pop princess style. A simple black skirt, patent leather heels, and a very expensive silk blouse with some kind of industrial enhancer that elevates her breasts to epic proportions. Her thick brown hair was cut into a fashionable Cleopatra hairstyle. The bangs made her huge yellow cat eyes look completely wild. On her wrist were a $20,000 Rolex Yachtmaster and enough gold to stock up on a pagan temple. But all this was presented in a consistently restrained manner. The term smooth socialite came to mind when I looked at Doug. I wasn't sure if he was walking or crawling. Obviously, he was not the brains of the operation, but it was probably finance. His companion Brad radiated a human attack. "You know this guy." Became popular in college as a middle linebacker, an approach he applies to everything in life now, including his wife, children, colleagues, and the few friends he can find. In fact, he was so alpha male that I expected him to lift one leg when he peed. Mary was clearly just there to chat. She was a senior partner at Deloitte in Chicago, and since I was consulting with them, I directed most of my initial conversation to her. She kept throwing glances as if asking, "Can you believe these two?" Both guys were completely indifferent to her presence. Mary was just a woman to them. Bernie said, "Doug and Brad were impressed with what you had to say and would like to discuss it further." I immediately understood what they wanted. They wanted to dive right into the federal fund. I spoke about the issue of national security. This made the feds nervous, and when a bureaucrat is nervous, he throws your tax money at the problem. My ideas were mostly theoretical, but Doug and Brad wanted to know all about it. They also clearly thought we were easily ripped off because I was an academic and Bernie was a bookish guy. I've spent my entire career dealing with this particularly hateful species of critter, and I realized a long time ago that life is too short to waste your time on obvious robbery. I enjoyed confusing them, keeping the conversation at a level where they couldn't understand anything useful, until I discovered that they were also those insufferable womanizers that I avoid like the plague. The problem with such simple creations is that they simply assume that every man is as lustful as they are. Therefore, they treat you as their brothers in arms. Neither of them understood that women are truly living, breathing beings with their own hopes, dreams, aspirations, and personal sense of values. And the concept that a woman could have thoughts other than, "take me, baby," just doesn't cross their minds. For them, all women were prey, just a piece of meat. I know a surprising number of guys who have this opinion, including one in particular, but more on that later. These two were classic examples of this species, and they were self-centered to the point of delusion. If it weren't for the fact that the women they thought were easy prey were obviously so stupid. There are always a lot of free women at large conferences, and the two seem to regard each of them with the same attitude as the Indians regard a happy hunting field. The key word here is free. These women could be happily married in real life, but at the conference all this is forgotten. Conferences always create a feeling of unreality. You arrive and all the burdens of your daily life are left at the gate. The mental compartmentalization and surreal world of air travel makes you believe that you have stepped out of your life and into Neverland. And like one of the lost boys, you regress to an age where you have no obligations, duties, or responsibilities. That's why I don't stay in the places where I perform. Evening parties and mixers are all part of professional networking, and the alcohol flows freely. And the sight of all these people rushing to their own destruction is simply too painful. But I had to admit that today's two scoundrels had a good eye for easy prey. They were now excitedly pointing out targets, like B-17 gunners over Schweinfurt. You know that routine scenario: beauty at 12 o'clock, big breasts at 4 o'clock, look at that ass at 6 o'clock, and everything like that. While this was happening, Marigold sat with an expression of complete disbelief on her face. I probably radiated terror. I looked at Bernie anxiously, and he read it. He knows my story. He stood up and said, "Thank you for the drinks, gentlemen. We'll be in touch." I smiled at the guys, not too kindly, and followed his trail. Bernie leaves a very big mark. I never stay at conference venues. It's too painful. Today, I stayed at the Hotel del Sol, which is a beautiful small boutique hotel in the Marina area. As we walked down the wide marble steps to the taxi rank, Bernie said, "Sorry about that, Davy. They seemed legitimate when they approached me." I knew what he was really saying. I said, "No problem, buddy. There's no way you could have known what they were like in advance. Brad even looks a lot like him." Him I was talking about was Marlon Ruffing, Don Juan extraordinaire. He was a corporate superstar, elegantly tall, stunningly handsome, and as relentless as a honey badger. And he was never more ruthlessly determined than when he pursued my wife Sarah. Sarah and I met through fun. We were both new to the Madison area. I just accepted a position as an assistant professor at a local university. There was a good salary and a research grant, which attracted me to the icy expanses of Wisconsin. Previously, I worked at a small technical college in Florida, but the temptation of the Big Ten was too great. I was dating a woman who was a secretary at one of the small research centers on campus. In our slightly more immature days, we called a girl like Linda a double sack. This meant that she had a class A+ body and a class C face. So there was a bag for her head and another bag for yours, in case her bag fell off during sex. I know it's incredibly superficial to talk about a woman like that. But what can I say? I was young and arrogant, and life had not yet taught me any lessons. Linda was a good woman, not particularly smart or sophisticated, but she had an incredibly flexible body, huge soft breasts, and she loved sex over and over again. We didn't have so much romance as we did a series of lustful adventures in strange places like forests and parks, the back seats of cars, and even once on a mattress in one of the big warehouses. It was an all-day event. Fortunately, the walls of these rooms are made of solid concrete blocks. Otherwise, the people in the warehouse would probably have called the police, because Linda sounded like I was killing her there. I could never understand why she didn't come to my house or take me in with her. That was until I learned to my horror that she was married. I never would have guessed it. She didn't act like she was married. She didn't wear a ring when she was around me. She simply said this to me in post-sexual relief. Maybe she felt that I was already hooked. I left her immediately. I had no intention of breaking the seventh commandment unless it was about not being jealous of your neighbor's sheep, in which case it was the 10th commandment. Luckily, this little incident happened a week after I met Sarah. A few days ago, Linda told me that she has a hot friend who works in her lab as a research assistant. She said the woman had just arrived in town for postdoctoral training and didn't know anyone. So she wanted me to set her up with one of my colleagues. I get it. She wanted to play the role of alpha female for one of her friends. The blind date was easy to arrange since I was in contact with other single teachers. I had a boyfriend who wasn't particularly attractive, but using Linda as a yardstick, I didn't think her friend would be any kind of prize, so I made the necessary preparations. The moment I saw Sarah Jones, I knew I had found my soulmate. I came to this conclusion the moment I saw her. No talking, just immediate liking. Let's go figure it out. I have no idea why I was so confident. I'm usually a pretty sensible person, and I don't usually jump into relationships without testing the waters. But I had to have this woman. Obviously, you have a list of qualities in your life that you want in your partner. I was not aware that I had such a list. But as soon as Sarah and Linda began to approach me, it was as if a heavenly choir surrounded me, and some heavenly hand checked off all the items on this list. Her face was stunning, a perfect oval, high cheekbones, huge blue eyes, and thick black hair. I couldn't take my eyes off her sculpted lips. Some guys like it ethereal and subtle. Others like it elegant and supermodel. It's a little embarrassing to admit, but I like big breasts, wide hips, and asses. I came from generations of German farmers, and this passion must have been ingrained in my DNA around the time of Charlemagne. I mean, I really like big breasts, and Sarah has given new meaning to the term brick dominatrix. This woman was several of my sweatiest fantasies rolled into one stunning package. She wasn't thick, but she was curved and totally sexy. She had a strong build, one you could rely on. You could have sex with her for hours and not break her. 30 generations of Huns clutched their hearts and fainted like Pepe Le Pew. Then she came up to me. I didn't take my eyes off her. She looked at me as if she was a little scared. After we got married, she explained that she thought I was a complete asshole. I should have been in love with her friend, not staring at her. I had to justify myself with madness. There was no logic to explain my reaction other than subconscious chemistry. Linda introduced us. Sarah extended her hand and said something like, "Nice to meet you." It was spoken in such a smoky contralto voice that I ticked yet another criterion off my newly discovered list. I have never met a woman who could express more sexuality in a simple tone of voice. Of course, her companion and my companion were a slight inconvenience. She immediately took the hand of the guy I arranged her with, and Linda took my hand. I was overcome by waves of jealousy. I spent the whole evening trying to get Sarah off Sid, and the more I tried, the tighter she held onto him, and the happier Sid looked. Linda didn't seem to take the hint, but she wasn't the smartest person in the room either. Sarah definitely understood. She continued sending a series of back-off, pervert looks. When we finally separated, I went with Linda and Sarah with Sid. She claims she didn't sleep with him after that. I do not know for sure. But Sid acted suspiciously relaxed the following Monday. Meanwhile, Linda insisted on visiting both the front and back seats and once on the hood of the car. It was a pity that she was married. I will miss all this passion. But it removed the only obstacle to my courtship of her friend. 2 weeks later, I was waiting outside their building. My heart was being eaten by swarms of insatiable hamsters. I saw Linda get out and get into the car. Sarah hasn't shown up yet. I knew she was a researcher, not a secretary, so I hoped she was still in the building doing something. I know how to navigate research institutions. I spent a lot of troubled time at school. I crept down the hall, and sure enough, she was in one of the labs, staring at the monitor. Her long, thick black locks contrasted sharply with the white lab coat she wore. I walked into the room and cleared my throat to announce my presence. She looked surprised, then looked at me angrily and said, "What do you want?" I said, "Hello to you too. I just wanted to pop in and talk to you for a minute. Do you have time?" She said, with obvious irritation in her voice, "I'm busy, leave me alone." Okay, this didn't go as I expected. I said, "Excuse me, can you spare a minute of your precious time to talk to me?" She said with venom in her voice, "I don't have time to talk to vile losers who ditch my friends for no reason." I said, "I'm sorry that you and Linda think of me that way, but I won't knowingly break someone's marriage vows. Loyalty is a really important virtue for me." I turned to leave. I have been rejected by beautiful women too often, but the journey back to the starting point is still humiliating. She said hurriedly, "Wait a minute. What do you mean by breaking your marriage vows?" I turned to her and said, "Linda finally told me she's married, and I just don't commit adultery. It is not right, so of course I left her." She said, "Seriously? Is Linda married?" I said, "Well, you should have known that. Don't girls talk to each other?" She looked stunned and muttered in disbelief. I had absolutely no idea about that. As I left the room, I said over my shoulder, "Well, she should have told you before she slandered me. Probably didn't want to look bad." I added under my breath, "Or just too promiscuous to consider marriage a problem." Sarah sat there, looking stunned. The next day, I left class and saw Sarah waiting for me in the hallway. She looked amazing. She was working, so she was wearing a lab coat that was open to reveal tight jeans and a simple t-shirt. It said, "I see stupid people." Yeah, sense of humor. I upgraded her body from world-class to intergalactic. She looked a little ashamed and wary. I was more than a little wary. I was angry. I said coldly, "How can I help?" She said, "If you come with me to the Student Union Terrace, I'll buy you a beer." One of the best things about Madison is its location on Lake Mendota, and on good days, the Student Union is one of the nicest places in the world to sit and talk. It's bright and sunny, smells of cooking sausages, and serves beer. After all, Wisconsin was primarily settled by Germans, and we love our sausages and beer. She asked me what class I taught. It was just a conversation to fill the gap of time between my school building and the Union. I told her about the nuances of ethical hacking, which to most people sounds about as appropriate as trust theft. But my students need to know how hackers work if they are ever going to understand how to defend against them. Sarah seemed to understand this without my explanation. Most people don't understand. In fact, She turned out to be a very smart woman. I'm a few inches taller than her and tried not to look at her huge breasts as they swayed back and forth. I didn't want her to get the impression that I was a pervert. We had a beer and sat down. She had a really beautiful face. Sitting in the sun, with the wind from the lake tousling her hair, I couldn't imagine a more attractive woman. Some of my students were also sitting around the terrace. They kept giving me approving glances. She said, "Look, we started off on the wrong foot, and I just wanted to clear something up. I did not know Linda was married, so leaving her, as she said, seemed to me a typically cruel man's act. It was only after I talked to her that I realized that you just did the right thing. I don't believe in adultery either. Honestly, I thought you left her for me, and that made you 10 times worse in my eyes. I would never try to steal a man from one of my friends. I know I'm attracted to you. I realized this the moment I saw you." I said, "Was it the neighbor or the stomping that gave you away?" She laughed and said, "Linda told me you're head over heels in love with her. So I didn't think you had the right, supposedly being so committed to my friend, and then courting me so much. It made you look like a super stud." I said, "It's because the moment I saw you, I knew you were the only woman in the world for me. I can't explain it and probably shouldn't try. I never liked Linda. I was attached to her. She is a good person. But she must have been smoking some kind of strong dope to think I was in love with her. Maybe she was confusing passion with love. Don't know. And then, of course, there was her completely problematic husband. You, on the other hand, are everything I've ever wanted or desired in one package. I could love you. In fact, I think I'm already in love, and I'm just waiting for you to catch up." Wow, it was semi-humiliating. I don't usually put myself out there like that. She looked at me with smoky eyes and said, "Well, maybe we should explore your little hobby. What time do you want to pick me up?" The rest is history. In 4 months, I went from a confirmed bachelor to a married man married to the woman of my dreams. She was everything I could ever want in a wife. She was a very smart person with a really great sense of self and a loving and giving soul. She was well-read, interested in everything, and incredibly funny. She was the perfect companion and best friend. Oh, and of course, there was one more little detail. She was a total beast in bed. I have always believed that passion in a woman is a direct function of her intelligence. Or, simply put, the smarter they are, the hotter they are. Sarah was very smart. She was also, without a doubt, the hottest lover I have ever known, and I have known many women in my life. Every man wants a lady in the living room and a bitch in the bedroom, and that completely describes my wife Sarah. And every morning she put on her business suit and went to work, looking like the epitome of a modern, executive female engineer, very intelligent and poised. However, the best moments of our marriage were simply sitting on our back patio, drinking beer and talking in the purple and gold light of a deepening Wisconsin summer evening. Cicadas, crickets, frogs, everything you need. This was my definition of heaven. She made me very happy, and I think I made her just as happy. It was an ideal life. We had been married for 9 years when a snake crawled into our garden. Sarah's company did low-level programming for various medical devices, and one of them faced a problem related to litigation. She was not the chief engineer of this device, but she had the most technical experience. That's why she was brought into the investigation team. The team was led by Mr. Marlon Ruffing, Vice President of Product Development. He attended all meetings and provided company policies. Sarah spent a lot of time telling me how insightful and funny he was and what a wonderful person he was. I had never met him, but I knew his type. My only advice, and I said it out loud, was, "Mr. Wonderful is trying to get into your pants." She was openly contemptuous. She said, "He knows I'm happily married. I tell him about you all the time, and he's very supportive of our marriage. He constantly tells me how jealous he is of you." I said, "I want you to tell this guy to back off, and I don't want you to be alone with him." She looked annoyed, but she said, "Well, if it makes you feel better, I'll tell Marlon that he needs to respect boundaries. But I want you to trust me more. You're the man I love, not him. Not the answer I wanted to hear, but she's stubborn. All smart women are like that. However, there were no more suspicious signs from Sarah, even if I wasn't looking for them. She was my wife and life partner, and I trusted her. She also stopped telling me about Mr. Wonderful. I know, I'm stupid. In early July of that year, Sarah decided that she wanted to attend a seminar on product safety engineering. It was a one-day technical conference in Chicago. Chicago is only 3 hours from Madison, and the event didn't start until noon. So she planned to go there on Friday morning and spend the rest of the day and night doing professional networking. She then planned to return at her convenience the next day. We had a long and grueling session the night before. She was so wild she could satiate a Playboy bunny. Madison's summers almost make up for the bad winters, and this year was almost perfect. Warm and sunny with less humidity than I'm used to in Florida. So I went for a run as soon as she left. Running has always been my form of exercise. I like to run 4 to 6 miles a day. This causes the release of endorphins, and of course, this distance keeps me in shape. But the separation was already starting to get on my nerves. Sarah always goes with me, and vice versa. This is what each of us prefers. There is no more interesting companion than my wife. She is an avid reader, and she has fascinating thoughts on everything from classic literature to current events. We have a MacGregor 26 at Lake Mendota Marina, and we spend hours on the water in the summer reading and daydreaming. And we have a little log cabin north of Madison where we do cross-country skiing and snowshoeing in the winter. Making love by the fireplace after a day of active exercise in the snow is an experience I highly recommend. I tried not to think about her, but I missed her. The seminar was just in Chicago, so I decided, damn it, I don't have anything to do today. Why don't I go there and surprise her? Maybe we can spend the weekend shopping in town or whatever else comes to mind. One of our cars is an updated Thunderbird that Ford has been producing for several years. It's truly Sarah's pet, but it's fun to ride. It was only midday and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I was in the mood for the open road with the top down and the warm sun on my face. The seminar was in full swing when I arrived. Having studied the schedule, I realized that it would end only in an hour, so I went to the bar to have a beer and a snack while waiting for her. While I was eating, I struck up a conversation with a guy sitting in the distance. The badge he was wearing told me he was at the same event as Sarah. I asked him why he was at a bar and not at an event, and he said that he already knew the material inside and out. But his boss didn't know that, so he uses this event as an opportunity to go out. I thought to myself, another great example of American productivity. I told him that I came here to surprise my wife, who was also at this seminar. He asked me her name, and I said Sarah Tyler. He looked at me strangely and said, "Wow, does she have the same name as Marlon Ruffing's girlfriend?" This statement hung in the air for several seconds before I finally realized what he had just said. I looked at him as calmly as possible and said, "Where did you get such an idea?" He said, "Well, I know Ruffing. He's a vice president at Acme in Madison. We do business with him. He's at this event too, and a woman named Sarah Tyler was hanging on him as his girlfriend." I said, "Sorry." I threw $40 on the bar and headed to the front desk. The clerk noticed the fire in my eyes. Wrong move on my part. I went into friendly Davy Tyler mode. I said, "Hey, buddy, I was wondering if a couple of my old friends are staying here. Could you look them up for me?" He said that, of course, he could not watch them for me. Guest privacy was paramount to the hotel. I asked him the same question again. Only this time, under my hand, which rested lightly on the counter, were 3 20s. He looked around. I moved the money towards him. He quietly pocketed the money, carefully blocking the view of the camera watching the front desk. He smiled welcomingly and said, "Of course, sir, we are always happy to help our guests." He typed a little, wrote something on a sticky note, and handed it to me with a metaphorical bow to his hat. There were 2 rooms on different floors. Thank God for mercy. I was leaning on a column in the lobby when the seminar ended. Some guys might want to sneak up and catch their cheating spouse in the act. But I'm not one of those guys. I wasn't going to let Sarah cross the line before I had a heart-to-heart with her. After that, she could do whatever she wanted, but I would have expressed my opinion, and it would be recorded. I also hoped she hadn't done anything too unforgivable yet. She left the event holding the hand of a tall, slender, and incredibly handsome guy. They were completely engrossed in each other as they approached me, laughing and talking animatedly. I have already hacked their phones and connected them. Obviously, blue snarfing was not covered in this seminar. With both devices open, it took me less than 10 seconds to do blue bugging. And before they were halfway through, I already had access to their data. I stood in front of a loving couple. They felt, not saw, my presence, and they started walking around me as if I were an obstacle. She still looked at him with loving eyes, holding his hand on her exquisite body. He smiled at her, saying something witty. I took another step to stay out of their way. He looked at me irritably. I said in my friendliest tone, "Hey, Marlon, who's your new girlfriend?" My voice brought her out of her reverie. Her head rose, and she looked at me in horror. Her face changed into a mask of horror. It was a completely satisfying reaction. The idiot continued to look confused and annoyed. She let go of his hand as if it were on fire, put both hands on her mouth, and said too loudly, "Oh God, Davy, it's not what you think." I actually started laughing and turned and walked towards the taxi rank, shaking my head in disbelief. I turned to her and said, "You really need to get yourself better writers, my dear." I then walked off stage to the right. As I was leaving, I heard the idiot say, "Who the hell was that, Sarah?" The whole way home, I thought about how long this had been going on. There were no signs of trouble, no delays at work, no late nights with girlfriends, no unexplained trips. She had actually been very loving the last couple of weeks, which might have been the only possible red flag. She probably felt guilty. I hear you asking why I didn't immediately challenge the boar to a duel at dawn. This is because I wanted to do a little test of my wife's fidelity. She was the only one I cared about. If she had come home soon after me, then we would have had a conversation. If she came home the next day looking like she'd been thoroughly fucked, I wouldn't have anything to say to her. Plus, I already had access to their data. She came out onto the terrace exactly half an hour after I returned. She was completely devastated. I sat there with a beer in my hand and watched the sunset. She was crying, which was a good sign. She was wearing a loose gray sweatshirt and sweatpants. It looked like the outfit Rocky wore in the first movie. I hope the analogy stops there. She must have run upstairs to change into something more comfortable before coming out to meet me. She was such a natural beauty that it took my breath away. I offered her a second beer. I grabbed both from the refrigerator when I arrived. It was like a measuring stick for our marriage. I wasn't going to take a sip until she came, and if it were warm and exhausted, then we had reached the end of the road. She sat down and stared into the backyard. It was getting too dark to see her face. I felt that she was gaining strength. Internally, I cringed at what she was about to say, but I tried to look as calm as possible. I was afraid that any of my excitement would frighten her. I calmly said, "Is there something you need to tell me, Sarah?" My tone expressed my love and care. I saw her make a decision. She said in a voice so quiet that I could barely hear her, "I haven't done anything to him yet, but I was going to cheat on you, Davy. Tonight would have been the first time, and it just breaks me inside to realize this." This information pierced me with the lightning of suffering, but I was strangely calm. I think I came to some conclusions on the way home and wanted to see how things would unravel. I sat there, looking at her, my expression impassive. This was poker at the highest level. She looked deathly scared and said, "I got sucked into it. Did you see him? You can imagine the effect it has on women. Every woman at Acme, married or not, was in love with him. He could have gotten any girl in the company, but he chose me." This was not a surprise. One only had to look at Sarah Tyler to realize that Mr. Ruffing has excellent taste. She said, "He groomed me tirelessly at work. Small gifts and constant compliments. He was my boss's boss, so no one asked questions, and his behavior towards me ended up creating an unreal sense of time and place. I wasn't just a 30-year-old married woman engineer. I was back in high school, and the coolest guy in my senior class chose me as his girlfriend. It was exciting on some fundamental level of my female ego, and every day I walked on a cloud, enjoying the envy of other ladies. I understand that women who weren't complete fools probably thought I was a cheater, but it seemed to me I was the most beautiful girl in the world. At first it was just flirting and dinners. Then, about 2 weeks ago, we were coming back from lunch, and he made a move on me in the parking lot. It was just simple kisses and little caresses, but I didn't say no. It was too exciting. After a couple of minutes, I regained my sanity and walked away from him. I told him that I am married and I love you, not him. I told him we had crossed a line and it was wrong. But from that day on, every time we went to lunch, he kept trespassing, and I never drew them again. I'm ashamed to admit that I was afraid that he would move on to another girl if I completely rejected him. I have a feeling you sense something based on the way I've been acting the last couple of weeks. I'm usually not that insatiable. I said to myself, aha, so it was because of guilt. She continued, this week he managed to get his hand into my bra. It almost did the trick. I probably would have taken him right there in the front seat if it hadn't been daytime and we weren't in a company parking lot. So sanity has prevailed once again, but we were both pretty excited. He looked at me and I looked at him, and God is my witness, but I knew I was going to sleep with him. I love you. You are my whole life. But I just realized that I was going to sleep with this man sometime, somewhere. It was an obsession. Since it would kill me to hurt you, I wanted to do everything I could to make sure you never found out, and I planned to compensate you for this in every possible way. It was a rationalization. I understand this now. I planned a trip to a seminar, and we agreed that he would come and we would spend the night together. Then, if it worked out, we would meet on a very limited and carefully controlled basis. This wasn't supposed to be one of those 3 times a week motel affairs. It was only meant to happen sometimes when the moment was perfect. And it's all just for sex. He's just so handsome. If I were a dog, I would have started growling loudly at that moment. She looked disgusted and said, now I realize how stupid that sounds, even to me, and all I can say is that I'm ashamed that I even thought about it. And I swear that I would like to make sure that you benefit from what I did by giving you my extra love and attention. I would not deny you anything and would strive to make you happier than you have ever been. Now, this all sounds incredibly weak, selfish, and delusional, but that's exactly what I was thinking 2 seconds before I looked up and saw you. And then the reality of what I was doing hit me. What can I say? I acted like an enthusiastic teenager. That's not me. I like to think of myself as a mature and sensible woman. I have no idea what could have made me act this way. Marlon is a very persuasive person, but the fact that I was willing to believe his words scares me. The entire 3-hour drive back was like waking up from a nightmare. I went from being dazed and confused to completely ashamed and embarrassed by my behavior. Coming back to myself was like quitting an addiction. It was physically painful. In 3 hours, I went from a stupid school crush to realizing what I had done in the cold light of common sense, and I was emotionally devastated. The guilt was terrible, and I was incredibly ashamed. I'm a real person, and I should have realized what I was doing. I'm so ashamed of myself now, and I promise you that I will never give in to that kind of behavior again. I told you everything as honestly as I could, and all I can do is beg you to forgive me. It was somewhat of a relief to discover that she hadn't crossed the line into something completely unforgivable. However, the impact of her intentions was disastrous. Cheating is one of those acts that ends life as you know it. One minute the days are certain and reliable, and the next moment you move on to a completely different path. All your comfortable assumptions and beliefs about the inevitability of things just disappear in the blink of an eye, and you remain as helpless as a newborn. Of course, there are cowboys who like to move from city to city, but for most of us, a stable marriage is the foundation of life. Your marriage provides order in a chaotic world. It gives you a sense of permanence, and it gives you the courage and strength to face difficulties. This is because you know that no matter what happens, you are not alone. You are connected to one special person, and you can always count on his undivided support and devotion to get you through difficult times. The physical manifestation of this special connection is the exceptional sexual intimacy you share. Adultery literally spoils this relationship, and the consequence of breaking this connection is that the two partners face life's difficulties completely alone. It doesn't matter that the act itself didn't actually happen. Intimacy revolves around exclusivity, and so the simple intent to move beyond marriage also affects your connection. I didn't explode. My father was a real man, and from the day I was born, he drilled into me his belief that all forms of emotion are for women. Real men internalize their anger and pain and never let anyone see their sweat. This likely explains why he died of a massive heart attack at age 58. However, by the time he left me, I had become who I am. I was a picture of calm with a layer of pure ruthlessness underneath. Sarah felt relieved. I saw it on her face. She brought the whole sordid story to the surface, and I didn't react too much. Since nothing really happened, she felt like we were already over it. But she had no idea what she had done. I said with infinite sadness, "The fact that you didn't sleep with him doesn't matter. What matters is that you plan to do so. And now that you claim to have broken the spell, I can only rely on your word that you will never do this again. The damage has been done to our marriage, and honestly, I don't know how to fix it. How can I trust you without keeping an eye on you?" She looked at me with a deep passion that I had never seen in her before and said, "It will be my job to convince you of my loyalty. You will see it in everything I do. I will regain your trust." I didn't believe a single word she said. In my mind, she'd fall back into whatever the idiot was selling once she got over the shock of getting caught. But I always play for the long haul. Time was to tell, and I've only seen a few of her cards. I waited until they were all posted before placing my bid. Waiting for things to happen also had other benefits. Sarah Tyler had a lot to offer a man, and before I make a final decision, I intend to take full advantage of it. So I had sex with her like the bitch I now thought she was. It was a different and exciting feeling to not care about her pleasure. Everything went wonderfully for the next couple of weeks. She was especially loving in everything she did. We ran together every day and spent the next weekend at the cabin, enjoying a very active and inventive series of games amidst the majesty of nature and the surrounding forests and lakes. I knew the shit-eater and Sarah were still talking at work. This was inevitable and impossible to prevent, but she used every possible means to let me know that she was being good. She realized that lunch was a hot topic, and so at every opportunity during the week she came to meet me at noon. I was almost convinced that the storm had passed when a small object I installed on their phones confirmed their betrayal. It lay there dormant, waiting to be activated by betrayal, and finally registered something interesting. If Sarah or the shit-eater called each other, I was the go-between. Essentially, what I installed on their phones was like a good old shared line. If they were talking to each other, I could listen. I even had a device set to record any conversations between them that I might have missed. Of course, I missed the calls that led to their eventual downfall. This always happens to me. Sarah began to convince me that her temporary madness was just that, temporary, and I began to think of her again as my loving wife. Therefore, after a while, I stopped paying so much attention to wiretapping. Then, one hot sunny Thursday in August, I noticed that I had 3 entries. The first was the usual grope that any predator makes when returning to its prey after being chased away. I heard him say, "Sarah, this is Marlon High. I just wanted to see how you were doing." She said, "Marlon, why are you calling?" I thought I told you not to contact me about personal matters anymore. I almost lost my marriage because of our carelessness, and I don't want to go back there again." The shit-eater said cheerfully, "Oh, come on. We didn't do anything to make you lose your marriage over this. If your husband is so insecure that he thinks talking to another man is cheating, then he needs psychiatric help. I'm your friend, and I'm worried about you." She chuckled bitterly. "Well, you should be. My marriage to Davy is the most important thing I have, and I don't want to do anything that would jeopardize it. And he's a lot smarter than you think. He saw through our little adventure." Asshole said, "We didn't do anything that you should be ashamed of. It was just two good friends hanging out together. Maybe we can do it again sometime. You know, I've never met a woman I'm attracted to. I was so drawn to it." Sarah said, "That's very flattering, Marlon, but you really need to find another woman to bother. I don't want to ruin my life because you're attracted to me, so please don't call me again." She hung up at that moment. Well done, I thought. This guy is a master of seduction. He planted all the classic seeds of doubt, and he'll probably show up in a couple of days to see how they've come up. He made the point that their relationship was platonic and friendly, not hot and dirty. He instilled the idea that I was a jealous whiner, and he greatly stroked her ego. Having completed the preparations, the next call was specific. He said in a voice filled with false sincerity, "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about our relationship, and we really need to talk. I miss what we had together, and I want to try to find a way that I can share some time with you. You are a wonderful woman, and being around you makes me happy. Can't you spare me at least one lunch so we can just talk?" She said, "How many times do I need to tell you? Davy doesn't want me to spend any time with him. He couldn't be clearer about that. If I even meet you to talk in the middle of Capitol Square, I will be breaking the promise I made to him. So please don't ask me to do that." The moron said, "I'm sorry to hear that you're such a submissive person. I thought you were an enlightened woman who didn't live under a man's thumb." She said with some heat, "It's not that at all, and you know it. We had an emotional connection, and almost a physical one, and Davy knows what could happen if we start seeing each other again, even if our intentions are strictly platonic." The shit-eater said with great pathos, "This is really insulting. Are you saying that he doesn't believe that you can control yourself when you're around me? I know you are stronger than this, my dear. I truly believe in you. How can lunch hurt anyone? And I really want to see you in a place where we can talk about things other than work. Your thoughts and feelings mean a lot to me, and we had some really good times together." That was enough. Her voice softened a little. She said, "We had a really good time, didn't we?" The desire was clearly audible. He said, "Of course you do. And I don't want it to stop. Just tell me you'll meet me for lunch, and we can talk about ways we can spend more time together without threatening your husband. I don't. I know why he's so insecure, but I respect his wishes. I just want to see you again." Either this idiot didn't understand the paradox of respecting my wishes while he courted my wife, or he was deliberately ignoring him. I was leaning towards the second explanation. She said with some sadness in her voice, "Let me see what I can do. But it has to only be lunch. Absolutely nothing else. This dinner just won't happen." I was going to confront her with the evidence and didn't care if she knew I was eavesdropping on her. Breach of trust goes both ways, and her sin was much more serious than mine. However, I had one more short call that needed to be heard. It was a 10-second call from him to her. He said, "Let's meet at Vilas Park. I'll be there at noon. The weather is wonderful. We can sit outside and talk. I'll bring a picnic and we can reminisce about the past. I really miss you." The call time was today. My watch showed 12:30 p.m. Picnic, right. Lying on a blanket in some secluded corner of this large park. It didn't sound very platonic to me. I thought, well, it's better to find out everything on the spot. I wasn't going to just sit at home and wring my hands, waiting for her to come back and tell me everything. Her Thunderbird was in the parking lot, so she's still there. It was parked next to a white Jaguar XJ. Of course, the moron had to ride such a motorized penis. I had no idea where they were. I assumed that they had gone somewhere secluded, so I walked towards the trees at the back of the parking lot. There were people to my left in the main part of the park, and I didn't think the idiot would take her there. There was a forest in front of me, and it would be quiet and secluded there. It was the perfect place for a date. I walked slowly in that direction, looking around for them. Vila's park is big, and I probably never would have found them if she hadn't moaned. Sarah gets very loud when she's excited. I aimed at this sound like a Sidewinder missile at the exhaust of a MiG-25 aircraft. They were somewhere under the trees, lying on a spread-out blanket. It was still a bit of a public place, but if you took in the moment, it was enough. I approached them, taking pictures along the way. It's interesting how people recorded visual images before the advent of cameras on phones. At this point, our marriage no longer mattered, and like I said, I keep everything to myself. So I stopped next to them and said quite calmly, "How was lunch?" It took a few seconds for my voice to register with them. Then they both nearly jumped out of their skin. He clumsily jumped to his feet, buttoning his trousers. It seemed that he was just preparing to begin the second act of the operation. Although he was taller, he looked scared. It was probably the murder he saw in my eyes. She opened her eyes sleepily and then did the same expression of shock and horror as a month ago. She screamed, pulled her bra back over her bare breasts, and began to cry. She jumped to her feet and tried to approach me. I stepped away from her and held her shoulders to prevent this. I looked her straight in the eye and said in what I hoped was a calm tone, "Sorry for the interruption. You can go back to what you were doing since you are no longer married to me." And I turned and walked back to the car. Different people have different strategies for hurting others. I didn't care about the asshole. I've already set in motion long-term consequences for him. Consequences that will hopefully make him regret ever being born. The photos I took were just a bonus. I know Sarah, and I knew that turning my back and walking away from her like I just did was the worst thing I could do. She doesn't deal well with guilt, and telling her that her marriage was over would destroy her. I also knew that she would run, trying to catch up with me, to explain herself. But first she needed to button her blouse, so I almost made it to the car before it caught up with me. I thought it was an asshole. Her arrival was just as stormy. She tried to hug me to stop me. She was sobbing hysterically, clinging to my back. I stood still and said in my most reasonable tone, "We can talk about this at home. Now let me go." I felt her force her hands to open. I got into the car, still calm, cool, and collected, and thought, "Thanks, Dad." She stood there, looking completely broken. Fine, I was busy for the 10 minutes it took her to join me at home. What we continued to do, with alternate visits after my discovery of her secret affairs, became a farce. She cleaned herself up and looked like my wife again. I was sitting on the deck, just looking at the trees in the back of our yard. She timidly sat down in her chair. She said, "I'm so sorry. I was just going to meet him for lunch. I went to reinforce that he should stay away, and I gave in again." I knew it was complete nonsense because I saw the result of that conversation. I said, "That's weird because I could have sworn it was because you wanted to find a way to spend more time with him." And I pressed the play button. She listened to everything, becoming paler and paler. She realized that there was no point in arguing further. If I had caught them at Panera, our ability to talk it out would have been severely limited. I said, "I get it, you can't stay away from him. He's a damn attractive guy and has a great set of lies. The problem is that I had a hard time justifying continuing with you after your first adventure. Now I absolutely cannot trust you, and I never will. You tried and you failed. That's no way to run a marriage. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move out, and we're going to get the quickest, easiest divorce possible. I just want to warn you that your boyfriend's divorce will probably take a little longer." His wife sounded like she was going to slow roast him. Sarah was shocked. She said, "Marlon is married." I thought, what kind of woman is this? Is she that naive? I said, of course, he's married and has 3 cute little kids. Don't you use Facebook? She just sat there like a wax figure. I said, anyway, while I was driving to the park, I sent the clip you just heard to his wife. That was before I realized how bad it really was. I don't know what she'll do when she sees these photos. And I scrolled through a series of pictures that I took as I approached the happy couple. I thought the photos were great, and 1080p was great for getting a clear image. I said, I also sent this to the CEO of Acme with the subject line, "This is what your employees do on their lunch break." I don't think it will affect you since you are a subordinate in many ways, but it won't help Mr. Ruffing's career. Tomorrow, I will be discussing this with your CEO over our own lunch. This will be a different kind of stimulation. Don't worry. My only condition is that you will not be affected professionally. Not sure about your boyfriend. She looked at me like a bird hypnotized by a snake, repeating over and over in a ghostly voice, "He's not my boyfriend." I said, you can stay here in the house. I'll live in the hut until I find a place. I loved you absolutely and unconditionally, and I don't think I deserve it. Don't try to fight for a divorce, and don't ever talk to me again. You owe me this. With these words, I stood up and walked to the door. My bag and suit were already there. I turned to her one last time. She sobbed loudly, hanging her head in her hands in the chair. I almost felt sorry for her. She was vulnerable in one respect and faced a predator who was able to take advantage of this weakness. It's a pity that real men aren't allowed to cry. Otherwise, I would have joined her in her grief. I turned around and closed the door on the happiest period of my life. This door has been closed tightly for over 2 years, but the feeling of loss never left me, and this was the reason why I hated any form of extramarital affairs and those fools who commit them. I agreed to terminate Ruffing's employment with negative references as a condition of dismissing the claim against Acme. They were very cooperative. They knew I had them on a short leash, and their CEO's reaction to my photos convinced me that he would have done it anyway. I also received their ironclad guarantee that the smell would not return to Sarah. I still loved this stupid woman and wanted her to have a normal life. Losing her job would kill her, and it would not be her losing her job that would kill Ruffing. The first year of absolute loneliness and deep feelings of longing for my ex-wife almost destroyed me. You never think about the empty eternity that follows divorce. This was especially true at Christmas. But I always heard my old man's voice reminding me not to give in. I threw myself into teaching and writing and managed to release 2 new books. It was amazing in such a short time. They were well received by the small group I call my colleagues. No one gets rich in the professional book market. There simply isn't a wide enough audience there. But I was in it for the ego and reputation, not the money, and you must publish or perish. My subsequent promotion to professor confirmed this. The idiot made peace. His wife thought the evidence was compelling, but that didn't justify the death of their marriage. And of course, they had 3 sweet little children. He has never slept with Sarah, and he is very handsome. So his set of lies got him out of hot water once again. On the other hand, I guess his wife kept him on a very short leash. The woman sounded like she was taking no prisoners. And since she was now the one making the money, I assumed the shit-eater wouldn't stray far from home, and if he ever did, she'd kick his ass. Some more emotional people would probably follow this asshole into a dark alley. But you have to be part of my world to understand why what I did to him was so much more satisfying than a few broken ribs. He didn't work in a blue-collar industry where the reason you left your last job doesn't really matter. He was in a position of trustee in the upper management, and there's nothing like being fired for sexual harassment to limit your long-term career prospects. I had no idea what happened to Sarah. She is beautiful, smart, and cunning, and I am sure there were many men ready to take my place. She tried to explain to me for over a year, but that ship has already sailed. I had no desire to beat her further. She knew what she had done, and we both paid for it. This was an unchangeable fact. So the only thing I could get out of further discussion is more grief. I tried to have a normal social life. I'm not that bad looking, and I'm a bit of a star in the hot area. So I had a choice of local women. Over the past 2 years, I have dated many interesting and very beautiful ladies. But there was absolutely no chemistry. I still loved her to death, and she was the only woman I ever wanted in that way. I quickly discovered that without sexual desires, there was no long-term prospect with any of these women. Modern girls expect to be satisfied at the end of the evening. It bothered me that I had no lustful impulses. But the only way to change biology is through your head, and I wasn't going to discuss my problems with a therapist. This was a weakness, and my father wouldn't allow it. But on the other hand, the woman who walked out of Fairmont with me was more attractive than any woman I had ever known. Marigold left the place with me, leaving the guys to do their own thing, and, by the way, also leaving them with a check. She looked completely pleased with herself. Looking at her, I felt my interest return, along with something else. My inner voice looked amused and said, "Welcome back." She was an irresistible creature. She just beamed as she walked. She was beauty, intelligence, and strength of character in one unmatched package. And she conveyed incredible sexuality in the swing of her big, muscular buttocks and the movement of her impossible long legs. As we approached the curb, she turned to me and said with absolute confidence, "Let's talk at Mark Hopkins. I'm staying there." The Mark was across the street, and Top of the Mark has been an institution in San Francisco since the FDR days. I looked at Bernie. He said, "I'm tired and I'll be back. But you two go. You can tell me the details over breakfast." Then he caught a taxi. I had a clear feeling that he was setting me up. Like I said, Bernie cares about me like a brother. I looked at her and said, "One quick drink up there and I'll go to him." We took the elevator, keeping our distance. The perfume she wore was another one of her obscenely expensive weapons, and they drove me crazy. I'm sure the pheromones she released would have had the same devastating effect on any other man standing within 10 feet of her. The lady pulled me in like she had her own gravity, and I resisted because she scared the crap out of me. She was an incredibly beautiful and sexually attractive woman with a personality like a force of nature that left no doubt why she was such a high-ranking executive. And it seemed that she deliberately chose me for some additional attention. I don't believe in coincidences. We sat at a table by the window, and I looked out at the city below. San Francisco is amazing in any weather. But on a night when the fog rolls in, the view from the 19th floor above Nob Hill is simply extraordinary. She fixed her huge, smart cat eyes on me and said, "What happened to you? I have never seen so much pain on your face than you did when those two idiots began their childish hunt for girls." I said, "It's absolutely nothing I'll ever talk about. Are you married? I don't see any rings. Or are you just lonely when you go out of town?" Being an asshole is a tactic I have adopted with sympathetic women. This keeps them at a distance. I hate any form of warmth or compassion from them. It hurts too much. She laughed. It was a strong laugh, like a man's. She said, "Great answer. I see that someone really set you up. And to answer your question, I'm 37 years old. I've never been married. I like variety. Too many men and not enough time." She gave me a look that was so hot that my acrylic socks almost melted. She added, "I've never known a man I could respect enough to be his wife, and most men I meet don't want to be my wife, although some people sometimes love to be tied up and dominated." Another flirtatious smile. "So I have affairs, sometimes long, sometimes one-night stands. I'm a senior partner in one of the big firms. I make more money in a month than you probably make in a year. So I don't need a man for anything other than a sweaty break. And I'm never alone. This ensures that I always have company when I want it." And she gestured dramatically along the length of her wonderful face and body. "If I'm interested in a guy, I take him to bed. It satisfies my needs, and I've never had a client complain. So why should I be attached to the whims and interests of one man when there are so many to meet and to know?" I don't throw the word hypocrite around lightly, and I can see by the look on your face what you're thinking. So let me clarify something for you. If a man behaves like me, his friends call him a stud. He is congratulated. If a woman behaves like me, men call her bad, and she is burned at the stake. This is the typical condescending attitude of a patriarchal culture. So let me assure you, I am selective about who I choose to have sex with, and I practice safe sex when I do it. I don't hurt anyone. My partners know the rules in advance, and I never intrude on someone's marriage. I like romance with my sex, even if it's just for one night, and I'm faithful to the person I sleep with until I leave. I lead my life regardless of anyone else's limitations, and I am a very happy person. Is this open enough for you, cowboy? Her incredible eyes pierced me. Now, who caused you such pain? She was stunning in the dim light of the cocktail lounge. Her excellent features were calm, and her extraordinary body was very relaxed, like a big cat at rest. Physical and mental strength absolutely radiated from her. The fog enveloped everything below in an unreal gray blanket. It was like a shift in reality, and I was transported to a mystical universe. I never imagined that a stranger could be so mesmerizing. My only thought was, this woman is almost divinely beautiful. Suddenly, I felt compelled to tell her everything about my marriage and how it ended. It was an inexplicable desire to remove the burden. It seemed that the woman had some kind of supernatural power over me. I told her about our wonderful life together, the one before Sarah's abnormal attraction to the jerk. I told her about how he almost seduced her at a conference in Chicago. She nodded, as if she suspected something like that. This made it clear why I was so reluctant to hang out with those idiots at Fairmont. I told her about Sarah's unsuccessful attempt to stay on the straight and narrow. Finally, I told her in great detail how my wife had slipped up and how I reacted to it. She leaned back and looked disapproving. It was an unexpected reaction. She said, "Let me get this straight. You caught some handsome guy with your wife. And because of this, you ruined 9 years of a happy marriage with a woman who apparently loved you to pieces. Seriously, no one can be that stupid." Now it was my turn to be puzzled. I said with some indignation, "What else could I have done? I could never trust her again. She knew what she had to do, and she failed. Once a cheater, always a cheater." She looked at me as if she couldn't believe what an idiot I was. This look would be offensive if it came from an ordinary person. Coming from this almost unreal creature, it set my hair on fire. There was suddenly not enough oxygen in the room. She paused as if about to ask a deep question. Then she said, "Are you acting the same as when you were a pimply teenager?" This was completely unexpected. I blurted out, "Of course not." She asked, "Why not?" I replied, "Because I've grown up. You learn from your mistakes. You can only hit your finger a few times before you hit the nail correctly." She said, "So, have you changed your behavior over time based on the feedback you've received from life?" I didn't like where this was going one bit. She made a fool of me. I said with some heat, "Riding a married woman's inclination to cheat is not the same as me learning self-control." She looked at me as if she thought I was too stupid to let me go outside. She said, "Really? Do you really believe this? In both cases, it is solely a matter of self-control. Tell me how one is different from the other." I thought for a second. She had a compelling argument. I said, "Well, I guess they're basically the same. It's just that my learning to be less impulsive was an inevitable side effect of me growing up. Whereas Sarah was already mature, but she still made the wrong choices." Then I thought a little more. I said, "Of course, she didn't really know what the cost would be. You don't commit a crime if you can't get punished. And Sarah is a smart girl. She might have thought twice about going out with that guy again if knew that the price was the death of our marriage." The goddess at the table looked at me as if she perhaps thought I had at least one smart thought in my head. She said, "It's just a matter of choice when you understand the cost. You weigh the costs and choose the option that offers the most personal benefit." Nothing is ever completely black or white. There are always trade-offs. But no sane person consciously decides to do something that he knows will be self-destructive. This applies to her decision not to cheat just as much as it applies to your decision to act like an adult, although I am beginning to doubt you. Your wife put herself in this situation because she did not fully understand what would happen to her if she did this. She was clearly attracted to the guy. This kind of subconscious attraction between men and women happens all the time. I'm sure you're also sexually attracted to the women you meet, so you must understand that. You just never acted on it. It was a conscious choice on your part. I completely get it. I am a man and a man. What she was talking about happens to me 3 or 4 times at a regular cocktail party. But of course, we all follow civilized rules of interaction, so nothing ever happens. But then again, none of the women I was ever attracted to tried to seduce me with the same degree of ruthlessness with which the shit-eater pursued Sarah. I wondered how I would react if a particularly attractive woman actually tried to do this. The goddess saw the flicker of understanding on my face and said with approval in her voice, "Have you ever told her straight out, 'I will divorce you if I catch you with this guy again'?" She said, "It's one thing to tell someone, 'Don't pick up that snake,' but it's another thing to say, 'If you pick up that rattlesnake, it will kill you.'" Now it was my turn to look at her like she was an idiot. I said, "Of course not. It never occurred to me to tell her that. I shouldn't have. I never thought to tell Sarah what would happen if she got lost, because I just naturally assumed that she knew what the real cost was. It's just common sense. She should have realized what would happen if I caught her with him again. I shouldn't have explained it." The goddess gave me an ipso facto look as if I had just confessed my guilt, and she said, "So she did not know that she was crossing any absolute line when she agreed to meet this guy." A lump formed in my throat. She said, "Do you seriously think she would have met him under any circumstances if she knew it would end in her marriage?" I bowed my head in defeat. I knew Sarah wouldn't do this. She's not stupid, and she clearly valued our marriage. She said this to the shit-eater on the phone. She wouldn't take the risk. I just knew it. I felt completely innocent. She said softly, "Being a woman, I know what she really thought. She thought she was in control of the situation. That's because she had no intention of cheating. There was no malice, no mens rea in the legal sense. She's not a complete bitch, right?" I said with some anger, "Of course not. She's very reserved. She has great self-esteem. She's never come close to inappropriate behavior with any other man except this guy." Marigold looked as if I had just confirmed something. She said, "Then I assume you understand that any woman with even the slightest self-respect does not plan to have sex on the street, in the middle of the day, in a public place where any passer-by might accidentally walk by. If she had met him at the Sheraton, then she probably would have planned to cheat. But her meeting him in the middle of all the mommies and babies and bugs and wildlife in a public park suggests that all she had on her mind was conversation. She's strong-willed, right? Thinks she's smarter than everyone else. She just assumed that the consequences of the first discovery would help her overcome her fatal attraction to this guy. And that meeting him again isn't a big deal. It's not something you'd break her up over, as long as it remained platonic. And she was probably also checking in with herself to make sure she closed that door. But by putting herself in this situation, she underestimated the guy's intentions and how deeply in love she really was with him. He clearly deliberately put her there because he realized she was still vulnerable, and all he had to do was give her a little push to make her fall over the edge. He chose this particular location because he knew she would never have met him if he had offered something like a motel room, so it was a cunningly planned seduction on his part. Her falling into this trap was pure blind arrogance on her part. All beautiful women think they can control any man. This was her main mistake. Let me ask you this. Do you think she ever slept with anyone else while you were married? I said with offense, "Of course not." I was confident in this answer. It simply couldn't be any other way. We spent too much time together, and I knew Sarah too well. I was absolutely sure I could understand if she went that route. In fact, I started getting weird vibes from her a week before she was going to sleep with the shit-eater in Chicago, and she hasn't even done it yet. The goddess said, so physical contact with this guy was her only mistake, and it was because he persistently pursued her. Besides, he was a walking phallic symbol. Right. I said, that's about it. He looks like someone right off the cover of GQ, and he knows his stuff when it comes to seducing women. She took a sip of her drink, set it down, and thought for a minute. She seemed to be trying to formulate a thought. She said, despite her intention to do this in Chicago, do you think she ever slept with him before you broke up? Did she admit to pleasuring him or satisfying him with her hands? I said, God, no, I know she didn't do it. The furthest he got was playing with her breasts. She said, and you divorced her because of this? What were you thinking? Are you that naive about sex? Then I just sat there, looking at the enveloping fog. For 2 years, everything was so clear. Now, this amazingly confident woman sat across from me, relentlessly destroying my confidence. I said with a voice full of irritation, are you condoning infidelity? Because that's exactly what it sounds like. She would have slept with him in Chicago if I hadn't intervened purely by luck, and she looked like she was going to sleep with him in the park. For the second time, this is a fact. It doesn't matter that she didn't actually commit the act with this guy. She would have slept with him, no doubt, if I hadn't kept interrupting everything. I even admit that she may not have planned this a second time, but she succumbed to his set of lies and thereby put herself in a position where he could attack her. It was disrespectful to me and to our marriage. I knew after the first incident that she would never leave him alone. The second incident just cemented that fact. The guy was much more attractive than me, and I had my own pride. She looked at me as if I had finally revealed the real reason, and this disappointed her. She said, are you telling me you just sold her on to that jerk because you felt threatened? You didn't fight for her, you just gave up without a fight because your ego wouldn't allow you to compete with another man for her attention. I do not condone infidelity, but I do affirm that the intention to cheat is different from the actual commission of a crime. It's the difference between standing on a window and actually jumping. As long as a person hasn't jumped, there is still an opportunity to change their mind. But you just walked away without trying to fight another man for her love. I can't believe you didn't do everything you could to talk her out of it. If you really wanted her, you'd fight for her. She hasn't done anything unforgivable yet. You should have dealt with everyone on the spot and got some sort of resolution. At least then you would have walked away knowing you did your best. I didn't like where this conversation was going. It made me look like a pathetic coward instead of the noble man of principle I had always considered myself to be. She said, let's get to the point. Did you ask her what happened next? Did she tell you how she ended up on her back? I said, I didn't say another word after I left. She tried to talk to me, but I wouldn't let her. She shook her head and said, do you think she loves him like she loved you? Are they together? I said, no, I don't think so. He's still married, and they don't work together because he got fired the next day. But of course, I could be wrong. I never see her, and no one wants to talk about her in front of me. She tried to call me on every major holiday, but I didn't answer her calls. Marigold leaned back and looked at me with an expression of gentle mockery. It was like looking at a retarded child, stupid and naive, but not guilty of his naivety. I understood what she was thinking. I'm not a complete idiot. This divine entity made me realize that I only left my wife because a more attractive man tried to take her away. Sarah is the woman any man would want. She approached, but did not cross any unforgivable boundaries. At the same time, she repeatedly stated that I am the man she wants. However, I didn't fight for her. There were no desperate attempts to save our marriage. No competition. I glanced at my opponent, and the moment she hesitated, I ran away. My inner voice sadly shook its head and said, you are an absolute coward, my friend. Marigold thought for a moment and seemed to have made an important decision. She rummaged through her small Coach purse, pulled out 100, and, as if by chance, threw it on the table like I would throw a dollar. She stood up abruptly and took my hand, lifting me to my feet. She said, "Come on, you need to change your attitude." I was completely confused. She instantly went from Grand Inquisitor to mental health specialist. We went down to the suite level and she showed us to her room. It was one of the terrace suites, nothing too fancy, just very luxurious. I looked at him like a village simpleton. She hasn't said a word to me since we left the restaurant. She simply entered her room and headed straight to the bedroom. It was understood that I had to follow her. It was just a matter of course. So I followed her like a little fluffy lamb. Did I mention she was a force of nature? I didn't feel the slightest bit cheap about it. I felt like I was about to go through some kind of transcendental learning experience where she would be the teacher and I would be the student. And the lesson, in fact, had nothing to do with sex, which, of course, was inevitable. It had an aura of renewal. There was no doubt. This earthly angel was preparing to give me the miracle of enlightenment. It was as if she was preparing to take me to a higher level of awareness, and it will give me back my courage and lost perspective. I wondered if she was turning water into wine as a sideline. I still wasn't sure how I felt about the situation, but old Lucifer had no doubts. He was ready. It was a complete surprise. He had been lying quietly since the day I closed the door on Sarah. Marigold turned to me decisively, almost in a businesslike manner, and took off her skirt. She then carefully placed it on a chair next to the bed. She took off her blouse and placed it and all her jewelry on top of her skirt. It was the first time I saw her body. She looked at me questioningly, but I stood rooted to the spot. I have never seen such luxury. I took her back and laid her on the bed and started having sex. We both slowly came back to ourselves. It was the most intense sex of my life. I crawled off her to lie panting on the bed. I woke up with the sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows in the suite. She was nowhere to be seen. I looked at the clock by the bed. It was 7:30 a.m. I probably only slept 4 hours. She appeared in the bedroom wearing one of those huge white robes. She carried one for me. I reached for her instead of my robe. Judging by her reaction, I realized that she was done with me. It was nothing like the all-encompassing response I had received from her body the night before. She handed me a robe and said, "I ordered room service. I hope you like full English breakfasts." This woman truly was an angel. I could eat a mastodon after yesterday's workout. I was pleased to see that she looked as satisfied as I felt. Last night, she was almost supernatural. She was completely giving, yet incredibly greedy. I assumed that I got her attention because she saw an injustice that she knew she could correct. I understand that basically it was just sex for her, but it was also a generous act of spiritual renewal. Last night, she helped me regain my courage, regain my faith in myself. I also understood that she was doing the healing through her own magnificent sense of self. This woman simply lived on a different level of existence, and she raised everyone she touched to her level. After one night with Marigold Wilson, I felt stronger and more confident than I ever had in my life. More importantly, I also realized that I could come back to Madison and do the right thing. She expected me to close the cycle with Sarah, and I had no intention of disappointing this excellent woman. She looked so immaculately beautiful, sitting there in a snowy white robe with her perfect face and tousled brown hair. The sight of all this beauty made my heart ache. She looked at me with her terrifying cat-like gaze. She said in a voice that brooked no argument, "You have to find her now and finish what you started. It's probably over between you, but you can't leave things the way you left them. You must have complete closure with her, otherwise you will die an old and bitter man." As I rode in the taxi to SFO, I began to wonder if the one I was making love to was real, or she was some kind of heavenly spirit who took a break from her angelic duties to touch the lives of two humble people. This experience was so out of the ordinary. I was exhausted. Sarah is great in bed, but Marigold Wilson was in a completely different world. It was like comparing a national champion to an Olympic champion. Bernie was curious about my evening, but didn't ask. He was flying to New York when we broke up in Minneapolis. I took a short flight to Dane County Airport. I hate traveling from west to east because the 2 hours of the day just disappear. So I arrived home at sunset, although it was still early evening at my departure point. I have a nice little condo near the Madison campus. It offers excellent views of Lake Mendota. Sarah got a house. I got a boat. Thought it was a fair deal. If it weren't for my little boat, I probably would have gone crazy last summer. I practically lived on the water. The peace and tranquility of the big lake kept me from going crazy, perhaps even literally. I thought about how to reconnect with Sarah. Obviously, I couldn't just call her and say, "What's new, baby?" Our breakup was unpleasant, and for 2 years I kept the Chinese wall between us. So I was pretty sure that if I just showed up on her doorstep unannounced, there would be no conversation with her. On the other hand, perhaps I will talk to the police. The best approach, it seemed to me, was face-to-face. This way I could read her facial expressions and better navigate the possible serious obstacles she would present. I absolutely did not expect reconciliation. Too much water has passed under the bridge since then, but I hoped that I could put all the hidden hurt and anger to rest. More honestly, I felt like I had to get my own happy ending. No, not that. I just wanted to speak out so I can move forward into the future. For all I knew, Sarah could have been married. I was sure she had a man, or perhaps a lot of men, in her life. She is the most attractive woman I have ever known. I didn't count Marigold because I wasn't sure she was even human. It seemed to me that the most hassle-free way to confess everything was in a public place, such as a restaurant or bar. I felt that she would be more calm if there were a lot of people around, and I was counting on the social situation so that she wouldn't make a scene. The last time I saw her, she was crying out loud. But in 2 years, she could become vindictive. I really didn't blame her. God knows I gave her enough reasons. I was a cruel, heartless bastard to her. Consequently, I understood that her reaction to any of my proposals to meet could be suspicious. But I couldn't think of any other way to do it. I had to receive her forgiveness in order to close this stage of my life. I didn't have to physically follow her to get all the information I needed. The internet provided everything. People who are confident in the deep spaces of the internet can find out anything. And I am a master of this art. So by nightfall, I knew a lot of things. And by the way, sleep came early because Marigold Wilson was killing me last night. Sarah still lived at the same address, and no one else lived there, so she was still single and living alone. That didn't mean she didn't have overnight guests, but she did not have a regular partner living in the house. I don't know why, but I found this knowledge deeply satisfying. She may have had the same difficulties as I did getting over our divorce. I also knew that she was still working at Acme, but was now a senior project manager, so I didn't really ruin her career. This also made me happy. The scoundrel now lived in Boston. Apparently his wife's relatives lived there, so he lived under her thumb. So glad. In my search, I learned that Sarah serves on the board of a group promoting science and engineering careers for women. It made complete sense. She is an engineer and was always ready to help. More importantly, this group held a benefit dinner and dance at the end of the week. How lucky! 5 minutes and a credit card got me a seat at the table. Better yet, it was a formal dinner. I love strict style. I know I'm not James Bond, but I like to dress like him whenever possible. The event was held at Maple Bluff Country Club, which was only 15 minutes from my house. Maple Bluff is a pretty chic destination for golf lovers. I'm not interested in this sport, so I had no reason to attend it. But I have to admit, the club was impressive when I pulled up to the valet stand in my Evoque. After my divorce, I bought a Range Rover Evoque. No Jaguars for me. I don't buy a car as a symbol of bachelor confidence. I wanted the luxury and power of the Evoque and love going against the grain. The parking attendant looked at my car approvingly. Most of them do. Sarah's group leased the building almost entirely. I saw a few people I knew as I wandered around with a whiskey on the rocks in my hand. They all greeted me with coldness. I didn't need to be a human relations expert to understand why. Sarah must have been there with another impossible-to-be beautiful man, and everyone was expecting trouble. They didn't need to worry. I wasn't close to forgetting her. But I also understood that the divorce was my decision, and I kept reminding myself that I needed to be a man and accept that she had moved on. Finally, I saw them on the terrace. They had their own little group around them. I walked to the edge of the group. Sarah wore a tight-fitting deep blue evening dress. Her curvy figure was highlighted in style. Her black hair and smooth dark skin contrasted with the blue of her dress and the almost identical blue of her eyes. Her companion was my height, but looked like a model and was perhaps 5 years younger than both of us. He had that 3-day stubble that all handsome young men sport, thick blonde hair, and he was a perfectly proportioned, slim, can-wear-anything type. He looked at her with adoration. Her eyes sparkled with her usual good humor and wit. She was the epitome of a late-30 professional woman, elegant, beautiful, and completely confident. That was until she met my gaze. I carefully put on the mask of good old Davy Tyler, the man everyone wants to have a beer with. I desperately projected goodwill, integrity, and unconditional good humor. It didn't work. The glass slipped out of her hands and hit the stones of the terrace. Everyone looked at her in surprise. She covered her mouth with her hand, which is one of her signature gestures when she's nervous, and I saw absolute suffering in her eyes. I realized that I would have a lot of work. I said as calmly as I could, radiating friendliness, "Hi, Sarah, I wanted to come over and wish you the best." She was still recovering when a couple of the women in her group leaned over to collect the glass. I continued to sound as calm and non-threatening as I could. "This is a great event, and I wanted to support it. I hope you don't mind." This was not as self-confident a statement as it might seem. Given my reputation, my presence at any technology event was truly a big deal. I then turned to the man Sarah was with and extended my hand. "Davy." He shook it gently and said, "Stephen, Sarah has told me a lot about you." I said with a smile, "Don't believe a word I say. I'm just a medium-sized bastard." He chuckled. We became friendly. At this time, Sarah came to her senses. She said, "Davy, what are you doing here? I thought you were in San Francisco." I wondered how she knew this. I said, "I got back 2 days ago. You know how much I support women in engineering. This event has been on my calendar since it was scheduled. I'm surprised to see you here." It was a cover lie, but everything was going so well that I wanted to keep the momentum going. She said, "I've been volunteering a lot since." And she couldn't finish. She covered herself, "Since I got the promotion." I said, radiating goodwill, "Well, this is really worthy. It's a pity that I don't have time." I turned to Stephen and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm a third-year surgical resident at the University of Wisconsin Hospital." Well, 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 model and surgeon. I added another 5 years to his age. Sarah must love the young and active. Of course, such beauty as hers could attract any man from 18 to 88 years old. I said lightheartedly, "I just wanted to say hi. I hope to see you again. Now I need to refill my glass." And he turned, heading towards the bar. At this point, I removed the psychic reflective shields from the DEFCON level 1/3. The fleeting flash of suffering and loss in her eyes was alarming. I kept wandering around the event because I was there to ask Sarah if she would be willing to meet and talk with me. I was afraid that her response to any such request would be humiliating to me, so I wanted to ask where there would be the fewest witnesses. The problem was that she and her date danced all night. Her arms were always wrapped around his neck, pressing her magnificent breasts against his chest. His hands lay on the rise just above her protruding buttocks. Sometimes they would slide a little lower to hug her. They kissed deeply and romantically after slow dancing. Of course, it was killing me, but I had to hold on. I could never have had a better chance to build a bridge to the next part of my life. And at that time, if I have to endure this painful sight, then so be it. I waited for Stephen to go to the toilet. He might have been a perfect specimen, but even perfect people have to go to the toilet sometimes, don't they? I didn't plan to dance, but women kept asking me. The last thing I wanted to do was get on the dance floor next to a loving couple, but I also wanted to be polite. I was sitting at the table, cooling down after a long dance with a charming little blonde, when I felt the presence of a woman. She stood there, looking just as soft and gorgeous as I remembered. She said, "You danced with everyone else tonight. How about dancing with me, just for the good old times?" Finally, I grinned at her and said, "I'd love to." And he extended his arms ballroom style. We must have looked like a relic from the Arthur Murray era, but I wanted this moment to be as non-sexual as possible. She got enough of a different kind of dancing with her companion. She walked towards me, and I felt electricity. She felt it too. She gasped slightly and began to tremble. We started with a little distance between us. But she came closer, and I felt her big breasts moving across my chest. She laid her head on my shoulder, and I smelled the scent of her magnificent hair. It was a heavenly feeling. While we danced, she continued to gasp. It sounded like a sob. From deep within my chest, I heard a quiet voice. "What happened to us, Davy?" I said, "I was a fool, Sarah. I know that now, and I was hoping you could give me an hour of your time so I could repent of my sins." She threw her head back. There were tears in her eyes. She said, "Tonight wasn't an accident, was it?" I said, "No, I wasn't, but I couldn't think of any other way to approach you in a non-intrusive way. I just wanted to be able to talk to you." God, I sounded exactly like a creep. So I quickly added, "This doesn't imply anything. I just want to speak out so I can move on." She said, "I've been wanting to do this since we broke up. We never had real closure. How about dinner tomorrow night at 6 o'clock? You can pick me up." Then she added with sarcasm in her voice, "I think you know where this place is." We both smiled. Even in such a tense moment, she could find humor. I said, "See you then. For now, I'm leaving after this dance." It was clear to both of us why I was leaving. I couldn't bear to see her in a romantic relationship with another man. My imagination ran wild all night, imagining what they were doing and how many times they were doing it. I kept telling myself, "It's none of your business. You have no rights to her. You gave up this." I knocked on her door at 6 o'clock sharp. She met me in a tight little black dress that almost knocked me off my feet at the door. She has become even more incredible over the past 2 years. Her breasts became larger, if that was even possible, and her waist and hips became slimmer. She painted her gorgeous face to highlight all her best features. I thought that her beauty could rival the unmatched attractiveness of the divine marigold. She said, "You really shouldn't have knocked. This has been your home for many years, much longer than we've been apart." I said calmly, "Now he is only yours." I intended the statement to be self-deprecating and not a shot at her, but her eyes filled with tears. I tried to retreat. I said, "So are you ready for dinner and conversation?" She perked up and said with extra energy, "Yes, sir, I'm ready." The last thing I wanted to do was make it seem like I was courting her. That wasn't the goal. And while there are a million great places to visit in Madison, I wanted to go somewhere familiar to complete the circle. Something like a talisman for good luck, so to speak. She seemed to realize where I was going when I turned off Langdon Street. She said with surprise in her voice, "Are you taking me to Union Terrace?" I said with a laugh, "That's where it all started. It seems like the only place you can go to complete it. Plus, I like beer and sausages." She laughed cheerfully and hugged my arm. She said, "You're right. It's perfect." Then she realized what she had done and hurriedly slid to the other side of the car. She said, "Sorry, Davy. That was completely inappropriate." I said, "No, that's not true. My main goal, other than speaking out, is to try to repair our friendship. You've always been my best friend, and I miss that." She looked towards the window. I knew it was to hide my tears. I needed to get my light mood back. So I said lightheartedly, "How are things at work? I heard you got a promotion." She said, still sad, "Yes, I'm the chief engineer there. I'm in charge of all product development and testing. It makes my day a lot longer, but it's something I can immerse myself in. I see you have 2 new ones. Books, so you must be very busy too." I said, "I try to keep busy. It keeps my mind off things." Crap. Was I born stupid, or was I taught to be such a fool? She became depressed again, looking out the window. We went out onto the terrace. Sarah, in a black dress, and I, in a jacket, tie, and khaki, stood out among the usual inhabitants of the place, like a pair of poodles at a cat show. Our table was free. We sat down to a pitcher of beer. With its fresh breeze and setting sun, it truly was a lovely place to sit on a beautiful evening in Wisconsin. She looked stunning. The pity was gnawing at me inside, but I had to put it behind me. I tried to speak as simply and directly as possible. I looked at her. She looked at me with something mysterious in her eyes. I thought to myself, take a deep breath, boy, and just get started. I said, "I recently had a little epiphany, and I need to say a few things. I hope you can understand. I don't want to bring up painful memories, but I must explain myself. And once I do, I can move on." She looked attentive, but there was also suffering in her eyes. I said, "First of all, I want to apologize for leaving you the way I did. We should have discussed this before I just brought the hammer down. It was stupid and cruel of me." She started crying again. I said, "I have grown as a person, and I understand that much of what happened was caused by my own personal insecurities. I'm not absolving you of the blame, but you've been relatively honest with me except for a few glaring instances, and I should have given you one last chance to explain yourself. I know that what I saw before I ended our marriage really wasn't grounds for divorce. It was a case of me cowering before I got hit. Simply running away the way I did was not very courageous. Your love was dear to me. I should have fought for it, tried to change your mind, done anything other than just run. So I want to apologize for my treatment of you and ask for forgiveness. Our marriage was far more precious to me than I could ever indicate through my actions." Her eyes shone with tears. I said, "So can you ever forgive me, Governor? The guilt is killing me. I thought I was being noble and principled, but in reality, I was just giving away the most valuable thing in my life, you." I added with my legendary crooked smile, "I see you found a way to deal with what that fool did to you. Stephen certainly looks like a godsend." She said sharply, "Stephen is wonderful. He has all the energy of a young guy, and I just love what he does to me." This sent my jealousy sky high. It showed on my face. Her face softened. She said, "I'm sorry, Davy. I know it was a cruel attack. I just can't get over how much you hurt me. You will always be the only man I've ever loved, and I'm furious when I think about how we could have messed things up so badly that now we're not together. I know I've done some really stupid things. I'm not going to make excuses." I said, "You never did anything to deserve the death penalty. It was an intention, not an action, that I was reacting to. With what we meant to each other, I should have tried harder to keep you around after that day in the park, and I should have let you explain yourself. It was pure arrogance on my part. I was sure I knew better." She said, "What you saw was exactly what you think. Marlon is a master of seduction. He had a picnic and a blanket with him when I arrived. So obviously we had to go somewhere to lay it out. Since I really only wanted to re-emphasize that he should stay away from me, I chose a quiet place to talk. I still wasn't sure I believed it, but it was a long time ago. The past 2 years have made this case look like something that happened in ancient Rome. And in any case, whatever she really intended, no harm was done, since I interrupted it before the bastard could even touch her. She said, "It was stupid to let him take me there. I knew I still wanted him, but I thought I was strong enough to just say no." I didn't expect him to attack me the way he did. The moment we sat down, he started kissing me passionately. It took me by surprise, and all my resolve went out the window. It wasn't even 5 minutes before you came over, but I probably would have given in. So I'm more to blame than you. I deserved what you did to me. I could have been unfaithful. I just wasn't fully aware of the consequences when I got there. By the time I realized the cost, it was too late. I guess I was just counting on you loving me enough to get through it. Now I realize it was painfully selfish and extremely juvenile. I said with great feeling in my voice, if I had known what you just said, it wouldn't be too late. But I had already begun my journey of hurting you. My only goal was to be as cruel to you as possible. You hurt me, and I wanted to make you feel even worse. Looking at you right now, it breaks my heart that we are not together. We had everything, and we just threw it away. I sincerely wish you the best in life, and I sincerely apologize. I will love you forever. I said everything I wanted, and it was as honest as possible. I suddenly felt much better, and I was ready to move on. I thought to myself, thank you, Marigold. I started to get up, but she grabbed my arm with both of hers. The emotions on her face were hard to bear. She said with pain in her voice, now you have to listen to me. I politely sat back down. She said, I was devastated when you left. I just sat at home and cried for 6 months straight. My work suffered. I felt like everyone there thought I was bad, and they knew why you divorced me. But even when you left, I wanted you to be proud of me. I knew you wouldn't respect the crying wreck I've become. So I pulled myself together and began to return to the world. I focused on work and started dating again. I've slept with half a dozen men in the last 20 months, and none of them meant anything to me. It was worse than nothing. It reminded me of what I'd lost, and I cried afterwards, even though we were divorced a long time ago. She looked at me with endless sadness and said, I know this sounds crazy. We lived separate lives, but I felt unfaithful to you. I understand that it was an absolutely pathetic state. She smiled sadly and added, naturally, these men did not stay with me long after I explained the reason for my tantrums. As I said, she has a wonderful sense of irony. Stephen is a nice young man, but he is not the love of my life. You are. I had a complete nervous breakdown last night after he made love to me. It must have been a result of me being in your hugs before. I told him what the problem was. He knows how much I'm still attached to you, and now he's in the past too. Another sad, ironic smile. I felt only relief, no jealousy. I smiled sheepishly and said, you have no idea how much I've learned in 2 years. It was impossible to explain how sudden this insight was. St. Paul and I could probably exchange notes. She smiled sadly and said quietly, me too. She added with deep feeling, so the question is, when we love and need each other so much, why are we separated? You've done some really stupid and painful things, and so have I. It's been 2 long years, and we're different people now. At least I know I've changed. I've spent hours reflecting, and now have a much better understanding of why I do what I do. I've learned to take control of my life. I said, so what are we talking about? I just wanted to apologize so I can move on. She said with hope in her voice, do you want to be? I said, that's a ridiculous question. From the moment I saw you almost 12 years ago, I didn't want anyone else. The opportunity to give back what we had would fill the bleeding crack in my heart, and I could become whole again. But how can we do this? She smiled and said, you always think too much. 2 long years have passed. It seems like an eternity. In fact, we are 2 complete strangers sitting here. I had to learn from my mistakes and move on with my life. And so did you. We're different people now than when we were married, and we'll probably have a lot of unlearning to do about each other. So to me, we just met. But I think I want to get to know you better. She leaned towards me and took my hand with both of hers. She looked at me with the hottest look I've ever seen on her and said, we should just treat this like a normal date and move on, sailor. She was an absolute storm that night, wilder than I ever remembered her. As soon as we entered the house, she took off her dress and dragged me into the master bedroom by the front of my shirt. Then she turned around and just tore my shirt. The buttons flew everywhere, and we had sex. Still sitting on me, she put her hands on my shoulders, opened her eyes, and focused on me. She was having a hyper-rational moment. In her striking blue eyes, I saw her incredible strength, vitality, and fundamental wisdom, and also something else. She conveyed without words what she understood through loss. The simple truth is that there is only room in her heart for one special man, and that man was me. It was a vision of the unwavering loyalty and absolute devotion that she would give me as a result of this knowledge. The insight she gained through deep sorrow would make her the most loyal and best life partner anyone could wish for, and this new understanding will determine her choices for the rest of her life. Chemistry is a funny thing. The attraction never goes away, and life has taught us both the price we pay if we don't accept this vital reality. Some people just know things. Others have to learn from their mistakes. Not admitting how much we needed each other led us both into almost unforgivable sins. But now we both understood the rules, and it won't happen again. She said with deep feeling, "I love you, Davy. I am yours. I will always be yours." I knew in that special moment that she is my woman and I will be her man forever. But I still added with complete sincerity, "And I will fight to the last to keep you mine." It was amazing. I just wanted to apologize to her so I could move on with my life. But without any planning or preparation, everything came together. Like the old Neil McCoy song, there was no doubt we were meant to be together. And no matter where in heaven she lives, Marigold Wilson has finally received her wings. The wedding took place on the terrace at Union. Where else? My bride was beautiful in a simple floral silk dress. My best man was a guy named Bernie. He was wearing his smartest Hawaiian shirt. Me too, and I don't care about traditions. We exchanged the same vows we made 8.5 years ago. But this time there was no doubt that they would be eternal. All they had to do was look into each other's eyes to know it. But I also learned that it is part of my duty as her husband to protect my wife from all predators, and I was going to devote myself to this so that she would always remain mine. As I told my guardian angel, "You can only hit your finger a few times before you learn." And we both learned the difference between to have and to not have. Returning to our home and our life together was joyful. We held our wedding reception in our backyard, the one we both loved so much. After the last guests left, I brought us a couple of beers, and we watched the sun go down. It was a hot day. The cicadas began their eternal rhythm. I looked at her sitting in her chair, the one she always sat in during the most precious moments of my life. She was my best friend and life partner. She looked at me and handed me the bottle. We bumped heads. She said, "Promise me that we will always talk about everything. Promise me this, please. If we are honest with each other, we will never lose this." I said, "I swear on our absolute good fortune that as soon as I have any problem, you will know about it. And I won't stop talking about it until we solve it. I will never lose you again." Then we both turned and watched the last bit of crimson sun disappear behind the tree line. We were together and peace and calm fell over both of us. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.